I just watched a video concerning gun control and, quote, assault weapons, unquote. I now have a headache. I'm tired of hearing this one. Even the pro-gun fool kept calling the AR-15 an assault weapon. You can't argue a point if you're using the propagandized term for a semi-automatic rifle. This argument from the gun-ignorant liberals just gives me a headache. The AR-15 is just a civilian version of the M16 without full auto or burst. No, they're not! They fire different rounds. An M16 and M4 will not fire .223 ammunition with any reliability and zero accuracy. You might be able to get your AR-15 to fire 5.56 millimeter, but make sure you keep spare parts around to replace the shit you're going to break. Which might include your fingers. The .223 is loaded to lower pressures and velocities compared to the 5.56 millimeter. The 5.56 millimeter creates a higher pressure. This will frequently cause difficulty in extraction, flowing brass, or popped primers. The overpressure could damage and or destroy your rifle along with your hand. The headspace is different between the .223 and 5.56 millimeter. The .223 is shorter, so has a larger headspace. This adds to the pressure issues. The 5.56 millimeter is rated for a higher chamber pressure. Not to mention the difference in bullet weight. It means the likelihood of hitting anything with a 5.56 millimeter and an AR-15 would be pure luck. There are rifles you can buy, proprietary name brands, who make their chambers able to handle both .223 and 5.56 millimeter. But you pay more than it's worth for such rifles, since you can't reload military surplus ball ammo due to them crimping the case. So the next gun expert who tries to lecture you on the AR-15 M16 crap, just roll your eyes, shake your head, realize they don't know what the hell they're talking about. There's always a constant when debating gun control with a liberal. 1, they know nothing about guns. 2, they know nothing about gun laws. And 3, they never want to admit it's not a gun problem and they're the problem. Liberals want you to believe it's a gun problem, when the real problem is they insisted we change the way we raise kids. Now they're trying to pass laws to deal with the monsters they made. Now, let's look at the history on the AR platform and why the Supreme Court ruled U.S. citizens should own an AR model rifle. The AR platform was invented in 1954. In 1956, they released the AR-5, which subsequently was adopted by the Air Force as a survival rifle and renamed the AR-7, but remained primarily a rifle sold to the civilian market and in fact is still available. That rifle was then lightened with composite materials and the numbers advanced to the AR-10. Still functionally identical to the AR-7, the AR-10 was lighter and used more plastic parts. The AR-10 was never adopted by the U.S. military. The AR-15 subsequently arrived and was never adopted by the U.S. military. The AR-15 was first available to the civilian market in 1963 when Colt was approved to market the Model R6000 Colt AR-15 SP1 Sporter rifle. Several years after it was first available to the public, it was sent to the Special Forces in Vietnam, who thought it worked better than the rifles they were using at the time. It was then military spec'd, adopted by the U.S. military and renamed the M16. The AR-5 through the AR-15 are functionally identical. The M16 is not functionally identical. The AR-15 was available to the civilian market for 5 years before the U.S. military adopted the M16, the military version of this civilian rifle. Not that any of that matters anyway. The reason you can't own a machine gun without going through a whole bunch of government regulation is because of the NFA. The NFA bans no arms. It bans features of arms, namely barrel length and firing type. The NFA was challenged at the Supreme Court, who determined that machine guns and short-barreled shotguns could be subjected to additional government-defined rules, not because they had military uses, but because they didn't have military uses. Therefore, your argument for revoking the right of civilians to have this rifle because it's a military rifle is the exact opposite of this ruling. A non-automatic version of a military-spec rifle is covered by the Second Amendment, as the Supreme Court points out, which is why the militia clause is in there, to ensure that the people always are able to train themselves with similar arms that they would be asked to use in the event that duty in a militia were to ever be needed. Or to form their own militias and rise up against their state were it to become tyrannical. Read the Heller and the Miller rulings. Furthermore, if you don't think that the militia is still a thing, ask anyone who was drafted into Vietnam or any kid that turned 18 and found out that he, and soon she, is required to register with Selective Service and be called into active duty at any time. Finally, if you're not willing to subject yourself, the police, elected officials, and those who protect them to these same common sense rules, then your rules are not common sense. They're there to limit the freedoms of those you would rule over. The police keep and bear arms for the same reason the rest of us do. If we don't need them, neither do they.